Webflow makes it super easy to create interactions and animations. In just a few minutes, you can create a 3D rotation effect, a page loading animation, or even a parallax effect that is triggered by page scroll. Hey everyone, I'm Adi, and in this course, I'm going to show you how to create what you just saw and much more in Webflow. We're going to start by learning the basics of Webflow interactions, how to add them, how triggers work, and we'll also play around with the animation timeline. We'll also talk about interpolation, easing, and smoothing. Then we'll dive straight into practical applications, and we'll cover several different types of interactions and animations, such as mouse-triggered effects, transitions, and page scroll animations. At the end, we'll learn about working with Lottie animations inside Webflow. Let's get to work and first, learn the basics. This video is brought to you by Envato Elements, the largest unlimited creative subscription in the world. Click the link in the description to find out more. In Webflow, interactions dictate how elements respond to user input or certain events. And to show you what I mean by that, I prepared a very simple demo here. You'll see that as I'm scrolling up and down this page, these elements, these two rows of images, will move left to right, independently, of course. So what's the interaction here? It's the scrolling, is the page scrolling, right? I'm interacting with the page, I'm scrolling up and down. And that action of scrolling dictates how these elements respond. And they respond by moving left to right, or right to left. So let's dive into Webflow and see exactly how this animation is constructed. And I won't go into super detail on in this lesson because this is just about the basics. So in Webflow, to get to the interactions, you need to open up the interactions panel. So you would go to the sidebar on the right side and click on interactions or press H on your keyboard. And here we can use two types of triggers, element triggers and page triggers. Now, page triggers are actions that involve the page. For example, scrolling up and down, right? The action of scrolling is a page trigger. Element triggers are, for example, when I click on a certain element. So let's go into this page trigger. You can see that every trigger is displayed as a list item right here, and we can click on it, and we have the following. While the page is scrolling, right, on scroll, we can choose what action to take. In my case, I want to play a scroll animation. And right here, I can search for certain animations. I can pick an animation that already exists. And then we have a couple of different trigger settings here. We can specify where do we want this to trigger, on which device, basically, desktop, tablet, phone, because as you know, in Webflow, you can design your website with different breakpoints in mind. In my case, I'm just gonna keep these on for all the demos. So if we want to create a new animation that will play as we're scrolling up and down the page, I can click the plus sign, which we'll do in future lessons. But for now, let's take a look at this gallery animation, which I've created for this lesson. So let's click on that and see what we got. This right here is called the animation timeline. You can see 0% at the top, 100% at the bottom. These, where it says row, they are called actions. So basically, if I click on this, it selects the corresponding element on the canvas, right? If I click this, it's gonna select the second element on the canvas. So these are basically references to elements that I already have in my canvas here. As you can see in the layers panel, or in the navigator, I should say, we have two rows of elements. And one important thing to remember here is that even though I'm executing an animation when I'm scrolling the page, I can animate whatever element I want inside that page. Same goes for an element trigger, right? I can select this element and add an element trigger to it. Let's say on click, but I don't have to animate this element. I can animate everything basically on the canvas, any element. It doesn't have to be the one that triggered the animation. Okay, now let's go back to our animation timeline. So on 0%, which means when the animation starts, I added a move action to this row, and I moved it 320 pixels to the left. As you can see, I can move the slider to affect the position of this element. Now, when the animation finishes, I moved the same element. Notice they are highlighted. I moved it to the right 320 pixels. So the animation goes like this. I can live preview it. So if I scroll up and down, you'll see that as the animation progresses, and here it's at 100%, which means I scrolled all the way down in the page. Now this row sits on the right side, 320 pixels. If I start moving the scroll bar up and I go all the way up at 0%, that element is at minus 328 pixels. We can't see it, but the animation still happens in the background, right? Let me turn on live preview again. So that's basically how it works. And for the second row, the bottom row, when the animation starts, I'm sending that to the right side this time. And when the animation ends, I'm sending it, or I'm moving it to the left side. And that's all there is to it, really. It's a very simple effect, very simple animation, but one that makes your a simple page interactive, basically. Now, if I would like this animation or these elements to move at a different time in the animation, I can do that, no problem. I can take them from here and I can move them down. Let's say I want to start animating when the page is scrolled 30% of the way. So now if I enable live preview, you'll see that the animation is slightly different, right? Because these are in their original position, and only when I get to 30% of the way, they start animating. See? And if I want to do the same for the bottom row, I can do that too. I can move it there. I can hold down Shift and select multiple actions, and I can hold down Control or Command to select individual actions just like this. Now, the stuff that you see here on the left side, 0%, 16%, 100%, these are called keyframes. And if you've ever done animations before, then you're familiar with this concept. And a keyframe is basically a point in the animation when something changes. But in my case, I'm running this animation starting from 0% to 100%. Or I should say the actions are at 0% and 100%. Now, if you would like to add an action, let's say maybe I would like to affect the opacity of this row. I can select that element and I can click anywhere in here to create an action at that keyframe. So let's say at, I don't know, 50%, I want to start affecting the opacity, right? I want to bring the opacity to about, let's say 50%. And let's also create a corresponding opacity property right here at the start, right? So with the row selected, I'm going to click on 0, set the opacity to 100%. So it has somewhere to start, right? It has an initial value. So now if I enable live preview, you'll see that as I'm getting closer to 50%, the opacity of that first row is set to 50%. And it's going to stay that way, right? But if I want to bring it back at some point, let's say at 72%, I want to bring it back to 100%. Now it's at 50% opacity, and now when I get to 72%, it's going to be at full opacity once again. And then if I want to delete these, I can hold down Shift, click, and then delete. Let's also delete this bit. And if I'm done with the animation, I can click on Save. Now, one term that you'll probably come across when creating animations in general is interpolation. And let me just quickly explain that. Interpolation is basically the creation of the intermediate frames in an animation. So if you think about it, if I move my hand, right, from here to here, you saw a fluid motion, right? You didn't see the starting point and then the ending point. You saw everything in between. You saw the whole motion, right? Well, those intermediate places where my hand just went, so that it gets from A to B, those you can call them intermediate frames. And the process of generating these intermediate frames is called interpolation. Okay, that's what technology does for us. So that's happening automatically. We don't have to do anything ourselves. It's just the intermediate frames are generated automatically for us, which is great. Now, another term that you might come across is easing. And easing is basically the animation curve. Now, let me give you a quick comparison here. By default, an animation is linear, which means it goes from point A to point B at the same pace, at the same speed. It doesn't have any kind of acceleration. So please take a look at the element right here at the bottom, the turquoise box. So if I hit go, you'll see that it goes from point A to point B. It goes from left to right at the same speed. The purple one, on the other hand, has this animation curve where it accelerates a bit at the start, then it slows down, and then it accelerates again at the very end. So you can clearly see what's happening here. And if I want, I can make this acceleration even more dramatic. Let's say towards the end, I want an even bigger acceleration. So right now, see, it accelerates a little bit at the start. It slows down to about here, and then it quickly accelerates towards the end. So hopefully that gave you a bit of insight into the animation curves and how easing can play a role in how an animation behaves. Now, if we go back to our example here, you'll notice that in Webflow, we have access to several curves, several easing options. For the movement of these elements, I chose in-out quad, which is a slightly different type of easing, but you can choose from any one of these. And you can even select multiple elements like I showed you previously and change the easing on multiple elements at the same time, like so. Now let's click Save here. And there's one last thing I want to draw your attention to, and that is smoothing. It's this option that you see right here, and it's under the interactions, not inside the actual animation that we created. So smoothing, you can think of it like a lag. It's like a lag, a delay that you apply so that the animation doesn't react immediately to the trigger, but instead it has, as I said, a kind of delay between the trigger and when the animation starts. So if I click this or if I drag this to 0, this will result in the animation instantly moving as I'm scrolling up and down the page, or the animation instantly playing. But you'll see that as I'm adding more and more smoothing, let's put this at 100% just to exaggerate it a bit. See how the animation kind of lags in a little bit, and if I scroll a little bit up, it starts moving. And if I scroll down again, then it starts moving a little bit. So it it just makes the animation smoother, see? 100% is still a little bit too much, so probably leave it at about 80%. This is really up to you. It really depends on how you want the animation to behave, but just keep this in mind that if an animation feels off for some reason, then usually applying some kind of smoothing will usually address that. Just give it that tiny bit of lag between the trigger and the start of the animation. So those are the basics of Webflow interactions explained in just a few minutes. And don't worry, we'll get back to these and we'll create them from scratch in the upcoming lessons. And speaking of that, let's get to work. Let's begin by creating some mouse-triggered interactions. Now, there are 3 mouse triggers we can use in Webflow interactions. We have the click, we have hover, and we have move over. So the click, pretty self-explanatory, right? It happens when you click on something. Hover is when you move your mouse cursor over a certain element or away from a certain element. And the mouse move over is a little bit different in the sense that it keeps changing as you move your mouse cursor over a certain element. It will animate continuously, right? So let's start by looking at a demo that involves the click trigger. For this first demo, we have a site header that has a navigation, and the first item in that navigation has a submenu. And I want to animate this so that when I click on the services link, this submenu is shown or hidden depending on its state. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we need to figure out the trigger, right? What's the element that we want to interact with? In my case, it's this link with submenu. Okay, so I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to interactions, and I'm going to add an element trigger. Click this, mouse click or tap. So now I have 2 options. I can choose what happens when we click it once, and I can choose what happens when we click it the second time. So when we click it the first time, I want to show the submenu. Okay, so let's select an action. There are a few pre-made actions here for you, but we're going to create our own. So start an animation. We're going to create a new one. We're going to call it show submenu. Okay. Now, by default, because we designed it this way, this submenu is visible. So the very first thing we need to do is hide it. So with the submenu selected, click the plus sign, and I can choose hide show. And in here at the very bottom, I'm going to set display to none. And this we're going to set as the initial state, which means that's where it starts. Now we need to show the submenu, right? So with the submenu still selected, click on another action. Again, we're going to select hide show, but this time we're going to set it to what it was initially. In my case, that's flex. Okay, so now let's save. So if I preview this page, right away you can see the submenu is hidden, and when I click on the services link, it shows up. Very simple. Now to hide it, because if we click a second time, nothing happens, we can go to, on second click, start an animation. We're going to create one that's called hide submenu. So with the submenu selected, click the plus sign, hide show, and set the hide, or set the display to none. Save that. Now if we preview, that's the most basic interaction we can do. But it's not much of an animated thing, right? I mean, it just shows up and disappears. We can do much better than this. So let's start with the show submenu animation. Instead of using hide show, let's delete those. Let's do something a bit more interesting. let's start by moving this element initially a bit further down. Let's say minus 24 pixels, or sorry, a bit towards the top. And we'll set that as an initial state. Let's also change its opacity. So click this, opacity, and we'll set that to 0, and we'll set it again as the initial state. And let's also affect the height, okay? Initial state again, and we'll change the height to 0 pixels. So let's save. Now, these are the initial states. This is where it starts, but how do we want to show the submenu? So with the submenu selected, let's add another action, and we'll start with this, move. And let's actually click and drag this outside so it's not inside the initial state group anymore. So we're going to move it vertically to 0 pixels, which is its initial position. Let's add a new one. Let's change the height to auto, which is its default height. And also change what else? The opacity, right? So change that to 100%. So now let's test it. So click, and it shows up, but it's not exactly what we wanted. And that's because these three actions all happen at a 0.5-second interval. So what we can do is we can execute all of these at the same time. So we can select one and just drag it over another one, and that's going to group them. Let's do the same for this. So now the move, the size, the opacity, they're both going to be affected at the same time. Okay, so save that. That's much better, right? Now, select all of these. Let's change the duration of the animation. Let's say 0.2 seconds. Let's also add an easing. Let's say in-out cubic. And we can also click this play icon to preview the animation live. So the animation basically goes from the initial state of the element to what we set after that. Let's also increase this to, let's say, 0.3 seconds. So now it looks like this. Cool. And we can preview it. Nice. Now, when we click again, this just hides, and we don't want that. So let's tweak the hide submenu animation on the second click. So let's delete this. And instead, what we're going to do is the reverse, basically, of what we did previously. We're going to move it up 24 pixels. We're going to change its height to 0, and we're going to change its opacity to 0. And just like we did previously, let's group these. So they all happen at the same time. And let's change their duration. We had 0.3 seconds there, and choose the same easing. So let's save that and let's preview. So that's show and that's hide. Show, hide. Perfect. One last thing to do here. How about we rotate this arrow so that it points up when the menu is open? So we go to the show submenu animation, and let's select the image, and let's add an action. We're going to choose rotate, and we're going to rotate to 180 degrees. So now it's pointing up. Same duration, same easing. Now notice the image is rotated after these three actions are completed. Okay, so the submenu shows, and then the arrow gets rotated. If we want this to happen at the same time, we simply drag it in here, and it happens at the same time. I don't know, personally, I think it looks good with a bit of delay, so let's keep that. So now our completed animation looks like this. And what are we missing? The arrow rotation on hide, right? So let's choose this. Let's choose the image here. rotate, and let's set this to 0. Duration 0.3 with the same easing. Save that. Now, I won't go over the mouse hover trigger because that's pretty self-explanatory, but instead, I want to show you a really cool use case for the mouse move over trigger. So that goes something like this. In this simple layout, we have a portfolio image, right, with some meta information on the left and the image itself on the right side. And I want to use the mouse move over trigger to kind of rotate this image in 3D as I'm mousing over it, basically. So let me show you how to do that. So let's go ahead and select the 3D image here, and we'll go to element trigger. We're going to select mouse move over element, and we're going to choose play mouse animation. We're going to create a custom one, and we're going to call it card rotate 3D. Okay. So what this basically means, we have two sections here, mouse X and mouse Y. And we have the two keyframes, 0 and 100%. Mouse X refers to the actions that should happen when the cursor moves along the X axis, so horizontally. 0 is when it's to the left. 100% is when the cursor is to the right. Mouse Y actions are the ones that happen when the cursor is moved top to bottom. 0% is top, 100% is the bottom. So what I want to do is select this 3D image. Let's start on the X actions. So I want to rotate this. I'm moving left to right, so I want to rotate on the Y axis here, right? And don't worry, this looks a bit off, but we're going to fix it in just a little bit. Let's add a very smooth rotation here of 8 degrees. And we're going to select what happens when the cursor is on the right side. We're going to choose this value at +8. So now, if we set up live preview, you will see that the card is actually rotating, but it doesn't really look like it's rotating, is it? That's because we haven't set a perspective. So to do that, we're going to select the parent element, which in my case is cell 2. And I'm going to go all the way down here where it says 2D and 3D transforms. And I'm going to set the children perspective here to, let's say, a value of about 1,000 pixels, something like that. Okay, so now if we preview, now it's starting to change. Now it's starting to look like it's in 3D. So it's a very simple interaction, right? I'm moving my cursor to the left, in which case the card is rotated by -8 degrees on the y-axis, mind you. And when the mouse cursor is at 100%, the card is rotated 8 degrees, so the opposite way. And I guess you can see that a bit more clearly if we go to the interactions here, right? And if we have live preview, yeah, notice here on the X actions how the card behaves and how the animation is happening. See, here I'm at the middle of the image and the green cursor there is at 50%. So that takes care of the X actions when I move the cursor from right to left or vice versa. But what about top and bottom? Let's do the same. Let's do rotate. When I'm at 0%, I want the card to rotate like this, 8 degrees towards the top, so to speak. And when I'm at 100%, I want this to be -8 degrees. So if we do live preview now, you'll see that the card kind of tilts to the bottom when I'm hovering here, and it tilts to the top when I'm hovering here. And of course, I can combine these effects to achieve that very nice hover effect. So let me actually show you in the full preview here. Now you'll see that as I'm moving my mouse left, right, up, and down, the card responds to my actions, which is super, super cool. One thing that we can do here, let's go ahead and save this. We can add a bit of smoothing. So, you know, that little bit of delay between when the trigger occurs and when the animation starts playing. All right, so the animation is just a little bit smoother right now, which is always a good thing. And since we're here, I might as well just tell you about animation resting state. The resting state is when, in this case, I'm moving with my mouse cursor outside of it. Okay, so right now, the resting state says that the X and Y are at 50%, which means if I'm like running the animation and I take my mouse cursor outside, the image element stays rotated as if my mouse cursor is at 50%, 50%, or right in the middle. And let me actually demonstrate that by bringing these down to 0%. Now the resting state looks like this. All right, so if I take my cursor outside, the card reverts back to this position because it's acting as if my mouse cursor was at 0% X, which is left side, 0% Y, which is the top side. So I hope that makes sense. But right now I'm gonna set these back to 50%, 50%. So the resting state looks like the cursor is just sitting right there in the middle. And of course, if you want to create a much more dramatic effect, you can change the rotation numbers here. For example, if I set negative 16 pixels, that's going to be a more aggressive rotation. Now let's change this to 16. And let's change these. Okay, so now you'll see that we have a much more dramatic rotation when I hover with my mouse over this. But again, don't forget, if you're going for one of these 3D rotations, make sure that you set the correct perspective on the parent element. So in Webflow, you go to 2D and 3D transforms, and under children perspective, you set the distance right here. All right, so with the mouse triggered effects out of the way, let's move on and learn about creating transitions in Webflow. You know, design adventures can be tricky, especially when you're on the hunt for device mockups, icons, and whatnot. So if you're looking for a place where you can find this stuff really easy, I recommend Envato Elements. Recently, I was working on a website design, and this feature section needed to show an image of the client's app. And it's a Mac app, so I wanted to present it in a special, meaningful way. So I found this Apple Pro Display mockup on Envato Elements. After importing it to Figma, I changed the image, then copied the whole thing in my project, adjusted the size and positioning, and I was done. Very simple, very fast. So check out Envato Elements for all sorts of digital assets. You need one subscription or unlimited downloads. For more info, check out the links in the video description. A transition is a basic animation that smoothly changes an element's property from one value to another. And in this lesson, we'll explore a different method of creating transitions, and that's by using element states instead of the interactions panel. Let's take a look at this header element. We have a navigation here with 4 links and then a button on the right side. But currently in the live preview, we have no kind of feedback for these elements. So when I hover on them, I don't get anything. I don't get a state or a change in color, in background color, nothing. And that's usually something that you would need to add to an interactive element just to signal that fact that it's an interactive element. So let's add some transitions for these elements. So we're going to be working with, first of all, with the hover state. Okay, so let's go ahead and select one of these links. And when I go in here to the style selector and we click on the drop down, by default, none is selected, but I want to affect how the hover state looks like. So when I choose hover, I can go ahead and make some changes. For example, I can change the color opacity to white 100%. So now you'll see that on preview, yeah, the link color changes, but it happens so sudden. Let's add a transition. So let's go back to the none state because transitions always get applied to the default state of the element. And we're going to scroll all the way down where it says transitions. Click on the plus sign. What exactly are we transitioning? The font color, right? We can choose an easing here, 200, or sorry, a duration, 200 milliseconds, and an easing. And I'm just going to go with the default here, right? So now we have the same color change, but now it has a transition. It's not sudden, it's not abrupt, it changes the color smoothly. Now let's apply the same principle for this button. I want this to change the text and the border color when I hover it, and I also want to make it a little bit smaller when I click on it. Okay, so let's select the button. Let's select the hover state. And when it's hovered, I'm gonna simply change the text color, the border color, and when I'm pressing it, I wanna do a transform, right? So I'm gonna go to 2D and 3D transforms, and I'm gonna add a scale, and I'm gonna make it, let's say 0.8 or 0.9, just a little bit smaller. Okay, so if we preview this, we get the nice color change, and when we click, the button gets smaller. But again, these changes happen abruptly. Let's add some transitions. So with the button selected, again, the default state, we'll go to transitions. Let's add one for the font color. Let's add another one for the border color. And let's add another one for the transform because we applied that, that scale transform, right? So preview. So that's a nice color transition right there. And we can probably increase the, decrease the transition duration here to about 100 milliseconds. Just like that. And that's how you add transitions in Webflow by using the element states. Now, let's turn our attention to scroll animations. Scroll animations are triggered by a scrolling action, right? And these can be applied to both elements and pages. Now, let me show you a couple of examples of how you can use these scrolling triggers. And we'll start with a demo that reveals elements as they scroll into view. So we have a very simple layout here. It's basically a gallery of images, right? And I want these images to appear as I'm scrolling to them, okay? So here's how you do that in Webflow. Just select any image and go to Interactions, go to Element Trigger, create a new one, and select Scroll into View. So basically, when the image scrolls into view, so when it comes from the bottom and the top of the image reaches the bottom of the viewport, that's when the animation starts playing. So here we have a couple of options. We can create a custom animation, or we can choose from the predefined ones that Webflow gives us. So how about we do that instead for this demo? So let's go with slide, and we'll slide in from the bottom, and it looks something like this. We can always hit preview here. So now if we take a look, it's good. However, it kind of immediately shows up. We don't really have the time to see the animation because it's kind of right there. So how about we add an offset to about 40%, something like this. And adding an offset means that the trigger point is not going to be right at the bottom of the viewport. It's going to be 40% from the bottom, which is roughly about here. So when the top of the image reaches about this point in the viewport, that's when the animation will start taking place. So right about then. So that's cool. But this only applies to this first image. How do we get the other images to behave the same way? Well, we can certainly select each one of these and repeat the process, but nobody has time for that. So select the first one, or the one that you applied the trigger to, open up the interaction, and all the way down here under trigger settings, instead of applying the trigger only on the selected element, we can choose to apply the trigger on all elements with the same class, which in my case is gallery-img. So now if we open up preview again and we scroll down, now that trigger is applied to all of the other images, and as they scroll into view, they will appear nicely. And what's nice about this is that I can, at any point, add more images with the same class, and they will have the same animation. Super, super cool and super easy. So if you want to add a simple effect like this, you don't always need to create your own animation. You can choose from the predefined ones here in this list. Now, so far we've focused on element triggers, which activate animations when interacting with a specific element. Webflow also offers page triggers, a very, very powerful feature that trigger animations when there's a change in the page's state. And a good example for that is page scroll. That's a trigger that occurs when we scroll up and down the page, right, or left to right. So let me show you two very popular examples of how to use these page scroll triggers in Webflow. And the very first one we'll be looking at is parallax. And I'm sure a lot of you know what parallax is. You've seen this effect implemented in websites and web apps. But for those of you who don't know, parallax is basically when objects in the background or objects that are further away from you will appear to be moving slower than objects that are closer to you. Think of the following example. You're driving or you're in a car and you're looking out the window, right? And you see mountains in the distance, and then closer to you, you see houses and trees and stuff. Well, the mountains will move very slowly, right? While the houses and trees will just fly by you, right? That's basically the parallax effect. So let me show you very easily how to create something like that in Webflow. So I have a couple of elements here that are overlaid. I have some images and some shapes, and right now nothing really happens because they're just static, right? I scroll up and down and they're moving at exactly the same pace, and you can't really tell which are closer to you or farther away from you, except for the fact that some of these are overlapped, as I said. But let's add some movement to this. So let's select the body element. We'll go to interactions, and where it says page trigger, let's add one that says while page is scrolling. Okay, so on scroll, we're gonna play scroll animation. We're gonna create one, which we're gonna call parallax animation. Okay, so let's start with the objects that are closest to us. One of the, probably the closest to us, the biggest one is this image, right? So what I want to do is, as I'm scrolling up and down the page, I want to move this. Okay, so as I'm scrolling down, let's move this up. All right, so, oops, that's the wrong slider. It's this one. Let's move this up. So at 0%, it's going to be roughly about here. And then at 100%, or when I'm scrolled all the way down, I want to move it like further down the page, something like this. Okay, so let's save that. And then let's preview it. So you'll see that as I'm scrolling up and down the page, we get a parallax effect. It's a very simple one, but that's all it takes. The object that's closest to us moves faster than the elements that are further from us. And we can keep going. We can select some of the other elements. Let's say this one. This is a bit further away. It's a bit smaller, right? So it needs to move a little bit smaller. So let's open up that parallax again. And we're going to select, this image. So when we're at the top, let's move it. This time, let's move it down a bit. And at 100%, let's move it up a bit. And we can toggle on live preview. Yeah, so it moves, but at a different rate. And we can do the same for the others. Select that rectangle, move it a bit up here, a bit further down there. And let's do the same for this image. Let's move this down. And let's move it up. Maybe this one. Let's move this down just by a small amount because it's smaller. So it should move less, like so. Did we miss anything? We also have this one. This is the smallest, so I don't know, let's move it just a tiny bit, like so, and like so. Okay, save, and let's check it out. So as we scroll up and down, you'll see the elements kind of move at different rates, giving us that parallax effect. Of course, you can go one step further, organize these a little bit better, maybe work on the shadows. So the elements that are further away have smaller shadows, while these that are closer to you have bigger, more blurred shadows. But for now, I just wanted to show you how to create this effect in Webflow. And of course, you can also play around with the smoothing a little bit. Yeah, add a little bit of that lag element. It's really up to you. Just tweak these however you like. And that's how you create a parallax effect. Now, for our final demo for this lesson, we're going to be looking at a scroll progress indicator. So what does that mean? Well, I have this very long page here, right? And I'm sure you've seen these around in many, many websites where you have like a bar that keeps growing as you scroll down the page. And when you reach the end of the page, the bar is full, right? And that's super easy to create in Webflow. So let's go ahead and select the body. Let's add a div block, for example. Let's put it all the way at the top, even though it doesn't really matter. Let's set some dimensions here. Let's set the width to 100%. Let's set the height. Let's say to 1 rem. And let's set the position. This is important. Set it to fixed. So it's always in the same position, right? It's relative to the body. And let's align it to the top left. Okay. And let's also give this a background color. Let's say kind of like an orange yellowish type of color, like so. Okay, and let's actually rename this to progress bar, just so we know what we're dealing with. Okay, so now if we take a look, we just have a yellow bar right there on the top. One other thing that I forgot to do, let's use a really big high index. So the element sits above everything else on the page, like so. Now let's animate it. So that's really simple. Let's go to body interactions and page trigger. We're going to say again, while page is scrolling, we're going to create a custom animation. Let's call this scroll progress. So we're going to select the progress bar and we're going to set its initial state. And at 0, we're going to set the scale on the x-axis to 0 and 100%, or when the page is fully scrolled, we're going to change the scale factor to 1. So let's enable live preview. You'll see that as we're scrolling down the page, the scroll bar goes from 0 to 100% width. But there's one problem. It does that, it scales from the middle. So that's actually something that we need to change back in the style panel. If we scroll all the way down to 2D and 3D transforms and we click these 3 dots, we can set the origin to the left side instead of the center. So now clicking preview will give us a fully functional progress bar indicator. How easy is that to create? Just with 2 actions, we were able to make that work. And those are just a few examples of how to create scroll animations in Webflow. Now, before we wrap up this course, I want to quickly show you how to work with Lottie animations in Webflow, because that's a very hot topic at the moment. For those of you who don't know, Lottie is a JSON-based animation file format that allows you to add scalable and interactive animations in your websites or web apps. This format was created back in 2017 by a couple of engineers working for Airbnb, and ever since then it's been adopted by anyone who wants, scalable interactive animations that are very small, in file size, and work on a bunch of different platforms. So web, iOS, Android, you name it, all the big companies use this format. So it's no surprise that Webflow also supports Lottie animations. Let me show you how you can add these to your Webflow project and, of course, where you can get them. Now, usually Lottie animations are created in Adobe After Effects and then exported as JSON by using a certain plugin that's called Body Movin. There are other ways as well, but that's kind of outside the scope of this course. What I want to show you is a place where you can get Lottie animations which are designed by the community, and that's lottiefiles.com. You can think of this like the kind of official library for Lottie. And if you go to products, you have access to some free animations in here, but also some premium animations, which are, for sale, basically. But if you go to the premium, to the free animations, and you search for something like loader, you can find a bunch of loading animations that you can simply download and add to your website. And you can click on a specific one, see it in action, play it, loop it, change some properties here like the color palette and stuff. You can do a lot with these. So let's actually import one of these in Webflow and use it as a page loader. And I'm going to grab exactly this one. So go ahead and download this. First of all, you need to create an account and create a workspace. That's all free. And then you can save this animation to the workspace and then you can download it. So once you're inside your workspace, you basically have a couple of options here on the right side. You can download and export this animation. You can grab the JSON file, which is free, but it's also the largest file format. It's 113 kilobytes. You can download an optimized JSON file, which is a bit smaller, but you need a premium account for that, which is a paid feature. Or you can grab an insanely small .lottie or optimized .lottie format, which is super compressed. In this case, it's just 7 kilobytes, but again, you need a paid account. You can also download this as a GIF, MP4, MOV, or a WebM. In my case, for this demo, the JSON is more than enough. So I downloaded that. We're going to go back to Webflow. And I basically want to add a page loader because I have all of these images and I don't really want to display them until they're fully loaded, right? So let's go and create inside this, or actually now inside the body. Let's add an element, a div block. We'll do just fine. And we're going to call this page loader container. And I'm going to set this to be 100% wide, 100% viewport height, so it fills the entire viewport. And then I'm also going to set this position to fixed. And let's align it top left. And let's set a really big z-index so it sits above everything else. And let's set a color of white. So currently it looks like this. We're also going to set display to flex, and we're going to align all the content in the center because this is where we'll be placing the Lottie animation. So let's go to assets. I've already included that animation, that JSON file. You just drag and drop it from your computer. So I'm going to take it from here and place it inside the page loader container. I can make the animation loop by checking this box. And I can preview it here. This is a bit too big, so in the style panel, let's change its width to about, I don't know, 32%, something like that. So now if we preview it, we have that animation, that loading animation that fills up my entire viewport. But I want this to stop at some point, right? And I only want to display it when the page starts loading. But the way it's currently set up, I can't really work on anything else on the page because this loader sits on the very top. So what we can do is we can set the display to none. Okay, we're basically hiding it so that I can work on the other elements on my page. And what I can do is I can display it when the page loads. For that, we go to Body, Interactions, Page Trigger, and I'm going to select Page Load. And when the page starts loading, let's create an animation. We're going to call it Show Page Loader. And for the actions, I want to take that loader container and I want to set its display to flex. So we'll save that. So now, yeah, when the page starts loading, the loader shows up. So this happens when the page starts loading, and it's going to keep doing that until we tell it otherwise. And here you have two options, basically. You can either create a new animation that executes when the page finishes loading, or you can hide it yourself after a certain time. So how you do that? Well, you select it, you create a new action, hide show, set the display to none, and you set a delay here, let's say of, I don't know, 5 seconds. Okay, and you save. So when the page starts, it's going to run this for 5 seconds, and then it's going to hide it. And you can, play around with the opacity a little bit, right? So maybe you don't necessarily want to just hide it completely all of a sudden, right? Maybe you want to affect the opacity a little bit. So let's set the opacity value to 100% here as sort of the initial state, and then set the opacity to 0 here. So let's reduce the opacity over 0.3 seconds. and then a second later, we'll just hide and show it. So, you know, we still have that, that opacity effect, that fade out effect, and then that's completely hidden, and we can, you know, interact with our page like we would normally do. There are lots of ways you can do this. Normally, I would add a second action here. So when the page finishes loading, that's when we hide the loader. But most of the time, with a good connection, the page loads like kind of instantly, and you barely see that animation. That's why for this demo, I decided to kind of fake out that that loading time by adding a delay here, just so we can see how to work with Lottie animations, right? And with that done, let's actually move to our final example. As I said previously, Lottie animations are also interactive, which means you can interact with them, right? So for this last demo, let's add a Lottie animation here in this blank section, and let's animate that as we're scrolling up and down the page. That's a super, super cool effect. So I went to Lottie files and I got this gradient animation right here. So I downloaded that, I added it to Webflow. So to see that in action, let me actually remove this page loading animation, just so it doesn't interfere with what we're doing. And we'll do the following. We'll go to animate while scrolling, which is this section here, and we'll drag the gradient animation in. And then I'm going to select the section. I'm going to go to element trigger. I'm going to go to page trigger while page is scrolling. Okay, so on scroll, we're going to play a custom animation. Let's create one that says animate Lottie. Now under scroll actions with the Lottie element selected, we're going to click on the plus sign, and under integrations, we have Lottie here. And this is super simple. At 0%, so when we're just starting to scroll, I want the animation progress to be at 0. At 100%, I want the animation progress to be 100%. That's it. And that's how it works. So as you're scrolling up and down the page, the animation plays. If you stop scrolling, the animation pauses. Once you resume, the animation resumes. How cool is that? And again, you can play around with smoothing and other options here, but that's a very simple way of animating or actually controlling a Lottie animation in Webflow by using one of these scroll triggers. And that's just a quick look at using Lottie animations in Webflow. Now, throughout this course, I gave you some pretty basic examples because I wanted you to understand how to create interactions and animations in Webflow, but there is so much more that you can do with this, and I invite you to explore that on your own and in your own projects. And speaking of, I'm curious, how would you use interactions and animations in Webflow for your own projects? Drop a comment down below. As always, don't forget to check out the Envato Tuts Plus YouTube channel for more content like this, but also to learn about web design, web development, and more. It's all free, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.